bring that into the mound? Or is this a separate?
I don't know. I just got here.
So do I. We're having another time with the rice.
The King of England, a man who has lived his entire life inside palaces, surrounded by protocol, greeted by prime ministers and heads of state, attended by royal staff who iron his shoelaces and squeeze his toothpaste, was standing in a Harlem community garden, holding a lavender plant, trying to figure out if a child was mixing something into a mound of dirt or into her mouth. And the look on his face? Priceless. Welcome back to the channel. If you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now, because today we are breaking down one of the most unexpectedly joyful moments in recent royal history. And trust me, by the end of this video, you are going to be smiling so wide your face hurts. We have got chickens, we have got hydroponics, we have got a child who does her homework ahead of time and is not afraid to tell a king about it. And we have got King Charles III, the literal monarch of the United Kingdom, completely, utterly, and delightfully out of his element. But here is what makes this story so much bigger than just a funny royal visit. This is a story about what happens when power meets community, when the gilded world of Buckingham Palace collides with the grassroots genius of Harlem, when a king stops being a king for one afternoon and just becomes a man, a curious, warm, slightly confused man, planting lavender with kids who have absolutely no interest in treating him like royalty. Stay with me, because this story goes deep, it goes funny, and it goes somewhere genuinely moving before we are done. The state visit. Let us first set the stage, because context matters here. King Charles III was on day 3 of an official United States state visit. Now, state visits are famously rigid affairs. There are motorcades and motorcades within motorcades. There are formal dinners with more forks than any human being should ever need. There are speeches read from prepared texts, handshakes timed to the second, and security details so thick you could not throw a paper airplane without it being intercepted by 3 different agencies. The itinerary is planned weeks in advance. Every word, every movement, every smile, choreographed. And then somebody scheduled King Charles to spend an afternoon at Harlem Grown. Now, if you have not heard of Harlem Grown, let me tell you about this organization right now, because they deserve every second of attention this moment of royal chaos is about to bring them. Harlem Grown is a grassroots, community-powered nonprofit based in Upper Manhattan, and what they do is nothing short of extraordinary. They take vacant lots, forgotten urban spaces, cracked concrete corners of one of the most densely packed cities on Earth, and they turn them into thriving gardens, into farms, into classrooms where children learn to grow their own food, to understand ecosystems, to appreciate where their meals come from. But it is not just gardening. Harlem Grown feeds children. They provide healthy meals and snacks. They teach nutrition. They partner with local schools and affordable housing developers. They grow mushrooms in their basement, pink and yellow oyster mushrooms, if you want the specifics, inoculated right there in their facility. They do hydroponics for rainy days. They raise chickens. They plant lavender with kids who name their plants after NBA superstars. This is a place built entirely from love, from community, from the stubborn belief that children deserve access to green spaces, fresh food, and the dignity of learning how to grow something with their own hands. And into this space walked the King of England. Think about that for a moment. This is a man whose family owns castles, whose ancestral estate includes Windsor Castle, Balmoral, Sandringham, whose household staff likely includes an actual person whose job title involves the maintenance of royal chickens at his own farm at Highgrove. He has been surrounded by gardens his entire life. He is famously passionate about organic farming and environmental sustainability. He talks to his plants. This is a well-documented fact about King Charles. He literally talks to his plants. And yet somehow, the moment he stepped into Harlem Grown, all of that went out the window, because Harlem Grown's plants talk back, through the children who tend them. The moment everyone is talking about. Here is the moment. Here is the one that started it all. King Charles is watching children work in the garden. There is dirt, there are plants. There is the organized, cheerful chaos that only exists in spaces where children are actually engaged, actually excited, actually present, and the king leans in. He is watching a child with her hands in the soil, working something, patting, mixing, pressing, and he asks, with the genuine curiosity of a man who has spent a lifetime caring about horticulture, "Are you mixing that into the mouth? Or is this—" He does not even finish the sentence, because the child looks up at him and does something that no courtier, no prime minister, no head of state has done to King Charles in a very long time. She just laughs, not a polite, diplomatic laugh, not a carefully modulated chuckle designed to make the king feel comfortable. A real laugh, a child's laugh, the kind that says, without any words at all, "What are you even talking about?" And King Charles laughed too. The entire garden erupted. Staff, volunteers, organizers, security detail, cameras, everyone broke. Because there is something about witnessing a genuine, unscripted, completely human moment of connection that cracks the armor of formality every single time. And this was one of those moments. But here is the question I want you to sit with for a second, because we are going to come back to it. When was the last time you saw a world leader, a king, a president, a prime minister, genuinely laugh at themselves? Not a performed laugh, not a staged, press-ready, focus-grouped smile, a real one? Because what we witnessed at Harlem Grown was not a royal performance. It was a royal surrender, and it was beautiful. The child who stole the show. Now let us talk about the real star of this visit, because King Charles is wonderful, and we love him for showing up, but let us be clear about something. The children of Harlem Grown ran this entire afternoon. There was one interaction in particular that has been making people stop their scrolling mid-feed and rewind. King Charles, in the way that adults do when they are trying to connect with a young person, asked one of the girls about school, a perfectly reasonable, perfectly ordinary question, and she answered with the kind of complete, unapologetic confidence that only a child who has absolutely nothing to prove can deliver. She told him she was doing fine. She mentioned how old she was. And then, and this is the part, when King Charles, mid-conversation, perhaps sensing he had interrupted, perhaps just being the polite, well-mannered man that he is, said, "How am I interrupting you?" The girl, without missing a single beat, looked at him and said, "Actually, I'm done with all of my homework. I should do it ahead of time." The garden exploded again. Let us just unpack that for a second, because I need you to really feel what happened there. A child, mind you, was visited by the King of England. The King of England, a man who has been trained since birth in the art of formal conversation, who has spoken before Parliament, before the United Nations, before gathered heads of state, and in the middle of their exchange, she pivoted, completely naturally, with zero awareness of how magnificently funny it was, to letting him know that she stays on top of her academic responsibilities. She did not ask him about the crown. She did not curtsy. She did not want a selfie or a souvenir. She wanted him to know that she is organized, that she plans ahead, that homework does not sneak up on her. The organizers nearby could barely contain themselves. One of them noted, beaming, that the children relate to the people who run these programs because they are community, because they are love, because they are the circle. And you could see, in that moment, exactly what they meant. These children were not performing for the king. They were just being themselves, loudly, joyfully, brilliantly themselves. And that right there, is the most radical thing that happened at this garden visit. Not the king coming to Harlem, but the children of Harlem absolutely refusing to be anyone other than who they are, even in the presence of royalty. The chicken moment, and why it matters. We cannot talk about this visit without talking about the chickens. Because before we even get to the garden, before we get to the lavender and the hydroponics and the homework confessions, the very first image that came out of this visit, the one that stopped people cold on their social media feeds, was King Charles III, dressed with his customary understated elegance, feeding chickens with a group of schoolchildren in Upper Manhattan. Now, there is something fundamentally funny about this image, and I say that with complete affection. Here is a man whose day typically begins with correspondence delivered on a silver tray, whose meetings are with cabinet ministers and ambassadors, whose afternoons might involve a state luncheon or the opening of a parliament. and on day 3 of an international state visit to the most powerful country on earth, he is tossing grain at chickens with 8-year-olds. And he is loving it. That is the thing that gets you. He is not tolerating it. He is not performing enjoyment for the cameras. King Charles is famously and genuinely passionate about sustainable agriculture. He has his own working farm at Highgrove that he has tended for decades. He is the kind of person who, when confronted with a chicken, is delighted by the chicken. He respects the chicken. He probably has opinions about the chicken. But more than the chickens themselves, it is what the chickens represent that matters here. Harlem Grown keeps chickens as part of their urban agriculture model, because teaching children that eggs come from animals, that food comes from living systems, that nature is not some abstract concept reserved for people who have countryside retreats, is exactly the kind of education that changes lives. And King Charles, a man with a countryside retreat who has been talking about this exact philosophy for longer than most of the children's parents have been alive, understood that immediately. There is a photo from this visit that is going to end up in history books. I genuinely believe that. A king and a group of children from Harlem standing in a garden in Upper Manhattan feeding chickens together. 2 worlds, 1 moment, completely, improbably, perfectly united. The lavender naming ceremony and Steph Curry. All right, we need to talk about Steph Curry, not the actual Steph Curry, though imagine if he had shown up, that would have broken the internet entirely. But the lavender plant that a child named Steph Curry during King Charles's visit to Harlem Grown. Here is what happened. The children were being guided through a planting exercise. They each had a lavender seedling. They were being asked to dig a hole, place the plant, pat the soil around it gently, the kind of hands-on tactile learning that Harlem Grown excels at. And as part of the exercise to build connection and investment in the plant, they were asked to name their lavenders. What would you name yours? One child, without a moment's hesitation, announced, "Steph Curry." The laughter that followed was immediate and absolute. And King Charles, who, in the interests of full transparency, probably does not watch a great deal of NBA basketball, responded with the kind of genuine, warm amusement of someone who may not know the reference but fully appreciates the energy. Another child named theirs Sunshine. And that contrast, Steph Curry and Sunshine, side by side in the same garden bed, somehow captures everything about this visit. The collision of worlds, the unexpected poetry of it, the way children just cut straight through to what is true and joyful without any of the layers adults spend their whole lives building up. Think about your own answer for a moment. If you were planting a lavender seedling right now, what would you name it? Drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to know. Because I think there is something deeply revealing about the answer to that question. It says something about what you love, what makes you laugh, what matters to you right now in this exact moment of your life. The children of Harlem Grown named theirs after a basketball legend and after the sun. King Charles dug his hole with them and smiled. The partnerships. A deeper look at what Harlem Grown has built. Now, I want to take a moment to go deeper, because behind the laughs and the viral moments, there is something genuinely important happening at Harlem Grown, and it got a spotlight during this royal visit that it absolutely deserves. When King Charles met with some of the organization's partners, the conversations that unfolded were striking. Representatives from a group called Sharing Access introduced themselves, and then came representatives from Genesis, an affordable housing developer who had been partnering with Harlem Grown for nearly a decade. And their pitch, delivered directly to the King of England, with the same unpolished authenticity as everything else about this place, was something else. One of the partners said with a smile, "We're not quite working on the East Wing at Windsor Castle, but we do affordable housing for working people." And then he explained how their basement provides water and electricity for Harlem Grown's mushroom operation. Pink and yellow oyster mushrooms, grown in a basement, inoculated on-site, powered by an affordable housing development's utilities. The kind of circular, community-sustaining partnership that does not get written up in glossy corporate sustainability reports, but keeps entire neighborhoods alive. King Charles, who has spent decades advocating for exactly this kind of integrated, sustainable community development through his various charitable initiatives, listened with what appeared to be genuine, deep interest. Not the photo opportunities, not the ceremonial visits, the quiet, unglamorous, essential infrastructure of a community caring for itself. The conversation moved to hydroponics, the soil-free growing systems that Harlem Grown uses for indoor cultivation, especially on rainy days when outdoor gardening is not possible. The educator explaining it to King Charles described it simply: it's space-friendly. And then, because these people speak in the language of their community rather than the language of grant applications, he moved on immediately to the next thing. King Charles nodded. He asked questions. He engaged. And here is what I want you to notice about all of this. There was no gap in the room. There was no moment where the king's world and this community's world failed to find each other, because the values were the same: sustainability, dignity, connection to the natural world, the belief that children deserve better than concrete and processed food, and the assumption that green spaces are for someone else. King Charles has held those values his entire adult life. Harlem Grown was built on them, and for one extraordinary afternoon, those two worlds found each other in a garden in Upper Manhattan. The vegan chips moment and the question of food. There was one more moment during this visit that deserves its own paragraph, and it involves vegan chips. At some point during the garden activities, there was a reference to vegan chips, specifically chips made from hydroponic lettuce. Now, I want you to picture this scene. Children who have just been growing lettuce under indoor lights, in water rather than soil, on rainy days when the outdoor garden is not accessible. Those same children are eating chips made from that lettuce. The entire cycle. Grow it, learn it, eat it, understand where food comes from, not as an abstract concept, but as a lived, tasted, embodied reality. And King Charles, standing there watching children eat chips made from lettuce they helped grow in a basement, was asked, or perhaps observed, something about the chips being good. And the response was emphatic: "But they're so good." This is the heart of what Harlem Grown does. They do not teach children about food. They teach children to have a relationship with food. And there is a profound difference. One is information. The other is transformation. Here's a question I want you to think about. When was the last time you ate something that you grew yourself, or that someone you know grew? When was the last time you had any tangible connection to the process that brought your food from the earth to your plate? For most of us, the answer is almost never. We are extraordinarily disconnected from the origins of what sustains us. And Harlem Grown, in a borough of New York City, with a basement mushroom operation and some hydroponic trays, and a yard full of lavender seedlings named after basketball players, is trying to fix that, for children who might otherwise go their entire lives without that connection. King Charles, who has been saying this exact thing in various speeches and interviews and sustainability addresses for literally decades, sat with children in Harlem and ate chips made from hydroponic lettuce and understood that this community had figured something out. What this visit says about King Charles. Let me take a moment here and be genuinely honest about something, because I think it matters. There are people who will watch this footage and say it is just optics, a carefully orchestrated moment designed to make the monarchy look warm and relevant. And look, I understand that skepticism. We live in an age where everything powerful institutions do can be read as performance, and the monarchy is, among other things, a very powerful institution. But I want to offer a different reading of what we saw at Harlem Grown, because the moments that went viral from this visit were not the scripted ones. They were not the formal introductions or the prepared remarks. They were the laughs, the unfinished questions, the child announcing her homework schedule to the King of England, the lavender named after Steph Curry. Those moments cannot be scripted. Those moments happen when the person in the middle of them is genuinely present, genuinely open, genuinely willing to be surprised. King Charles has a long, documented history of caring about the things Harlem Grown stands for. His organic farm at Highgrove has been running since the 1980s. He founded what eventually became the Prince's Trust, which has supported millions of young people from disadvantaged backgrounds across the UK. He has been talking about climate, sustainability, and the importance of reconnecting communities with nature since before it was fashionable, since before it was a hashtag, since before it was in a TED Talk. He used to get mocked for it. And here he is, decades later, in Harlem, planting lavender with children who named their seedlings after basketball players. There is a thread there. It is a genuine thread, and the children felt it, because children always feel it when something is real. The organizers' words and what they reveal. At one point during the visit, one of the Harlem-grown educators said something that I have been thinking about ever since I first saw this footage. She was explaining why the children relate so strongly to the people who run these programs. And she said something like, they relate to her because she is their community. She is love. And that is the circle. The circle. Think about that for a second. In one sentence, she described the entire philosophy of what makes a community organization like Harlem Grown work. It is not a program. It is not a service delivery model. It is a circle, a closed loop of love, where the people who teach are from the community, where the children who learn become the community, where the food that grows feeds the community, where the circle sustains itself. And then King Charles arrived, from the most famous family in the world, from a lineage that stretches back through centuries of British history, and he stepped into the circle. And the circle held him for an afternoon. There is something profoundly hopeful about that. In a world that feels, much of the time, like it is fracturing along every possible fault line, political, economic, cultural, generational, here was an afternoon where none of those fractures mattered, where what mattered was a hole in the dirt, and a lavender plant, and a child's laugh. The viral moment revisited, and why it resonates. Let us go back to the beginning. Let us go back to that laugh. King Charles leaning in. Are you mixing that into the mouth, or is this? And then the laugh. The child's laugh. Immediate, total, genuine. Why does this resonate so deeply? Why has this clip been shared millions of times? Why are people who have never thought about Harlem Grown and who have no particular opinion about the British monarchy stopping to watch this moment on their phones? I think it is because we are desperately hungry for unscripted joy. We have become so accustomed to public life being a performance, politicians performing concern, celebrities performing relatability, institutions performing humanity, that when something genuinely spontaneous and funny and warm happens in a public space, we do not quite know what to do with it. We just know we cannot look away. A king was confused about what a child was doing with some dirt. The child laughed. The king laughed. The garden laughed. Nobody planned that. Nobody could have planned that. And that is exactly why it matters. The bigger picture, what Harlem Grown needs from this moment. Now, here is where I want to get practical for a second, because I think this viral moment carries a responsibility with it. Harlem Grown is doing extraordinary work, but they are doing it, as all grassroots community organizations do, on limited resources, with incredible heart, and with an ongoing need for support, but only if it translates into something tangible. If you watched this video and you felt something, if you laughed at the homework girl, if you were moved by the circle of love, if you thought about that lavender plant named Steph Curry and smiled, then I want to ask you to do something. Look up Harlem Grown. Read about what they do. If you are able to support them, support them. If you can spread the word, spread the word. If you are an educator or a community organizer or a developer or a policymaker watching this, take note of what this model represents. Because the work of Harlem Grown is bigger than one viral royal visit. It was happening before King Charles showed up, and it will keep happening long after the cameras have moved on. The children in that garden were growing things before he arrived, and they will keep growing things after the news cycle has moved on to the next thing. They deserve sustained attention, not just viral attention. The moment that made everyone laugh. Full circle. We are almost at the end, and I want to bring us full circle. By the end of the visit, King Charles had fed chickens, planted lavender, learned about hydroponic systems, eaten, or at least observed, chips made from basement-grown lettuce, met affordable housing developers, been cheerfully interrupted by a girl proud of her homework habits, and survived a child's completely uninhibited laughter at his attempt to understand what was happening with the dirt. And then, somewhere in the middle of it all, there was one more moment. He was standing near some of the garden beds, and someone asked about what was growing. There was a confused pause. Someone said something about peppers. The exact exchange is lost a little in the wonderful chaos of children and gardens and cameras and royal security, but the feeling of it is perfectly preserved. It was the feeling of a man who was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not because it was on an itinerary, but because it was real. That is what Harlem Grown gave King Charles that day. And that is what King Charles gave back, by showing up fully, by laughing genuinely, by engaging with every single person in that garden with the same attention and warmth. Not a king and his subjects, just people, in a garden, planting things and laughing. We started with a king confused about dirt. We ended with something much bigger than that. We ended with a story about community, about sustainability, about children who have not been taught to be small in the presence of power. We ended with a story about what it looks like when the world's most formal traditions meet the world's most organic joy. I want to ask you 3 things before you click away. First, subscribe to this channel. If this kind of storytelling, the kind that takes a viral moment and finds the real story underneath it, is something you value, then hit subscribe. We do this every week. Second, share this video. Share it with someone who needs a laugh today. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that joy is still out there, that communities are still building extraordinary things, that children are still the realest, most honest, most hilarious people on earth. And third, tell me in the comments, what would you name your lavender plant? Seriously, I am reading every single comment, and if you get it just right, I might feature it in the next video. King Charles went to Harlem and came back laughing. That is the story. That is the whole beautiful, funny, moving, hopeful story. Thanks for watching.